Let's watch an interview with unfortunate new Republican Indiana Senator Jim Banks as he does straight up misinformation and spreading right-wing propaganda about Trump, his goals, and the position of the current Republican Party, where I'll of course be back after to provide the very much needed fact checks.
The Tax Cuts and Jobs Act was historic and good for this country, but the old school Republican Party focused on corporate tax cuts. The new Republican Party, the party of Donald Trump, is going to focus more on those tax cuts for working families, for small businesses, and pass-throughs. So when we start the new Congress and we focus on making the Trump tax cuts permanent, we're talking about tax cuts on families and small businesses. That's what makes this a new and better Republican Party.
Okay, I think it goes without saying, this is all very much untrue. I have an interview with Pulitzer Prize winning tax reporter James Steele, who goes in depth detailing the gross untruth of this that you can look at if you want. Trump actually favored corporations and the wealthy even more so in his tax cuts than past Republican attempts. And he's now talking about going even further with cutting more corporate taxes even lower, while he hasn't reiterated a single additional tax cut for the working class that he plans to add in. Large corporate tax cuts, pass-through income tax cuts, cutting the AMT, doubling the estate tax exemption. These are all tax breaks that were in his Tax Cuts and Jobs Act in 2017 that only benefit the wealthy, right? Meanwhile, the working class only got the small income tax cuts. Even things like the child tax credit were tied to an income threshold that cut millions of low-income working families from getting it, and Trump cut other things that kind of like leveled off or put that at or negated that for the middle class, which is why you see when you look at the results of after-tax income, most of the benefits went to the top 10%. Their after-tax income benefited 3 times that of the middle class. And this is because, again, the benefits were skewed to the wealthy. It's not they make more money so they get more taxes back. No, the benefits were skewed to them, so they saw larger benefits after. Like, this is kind of like where Republicans try to obfuscate on that. Well, they paid more taxes. So no, they were getting more tax cuts. And also after this, business investment dropped. So it even further hurt workers, as larger business investments leads to higher wages, more jobs being created, these kinds of things. It was absolutely an old school Republican corporate wealthy guy tax cuts that Trump tries to sell as working class tax cuts as part of his everyman marketing. And he now wants to come back and extend those even further, where he'll never make these middle class tax cuts permanent. That's just what you dangle in front of them to keep them, into it.
The easy win, I think, though, is what Stephen Miller and Leader Thune and other Republicans are crafting in the first package that would focus on securing the border, which, by the way, is important to union workers and working class families to save their jobs, and also to focus on energy independence that will make sure that this economy keeps growing and America controls its own destiny. So those early priorities in that first bucket in the reconciliation package are important to working class families as well. But Manu, the biggest story out of Washington, D.C. this week wasn't about Republicans. It's about Democrats who have completely abandoned the working class. You had Leader Hakeem Jeffries, the minority leader in the House, who traded a deal away to save union jobs from China in outbound investments in the defense bill because the Democrats were so mad about Republicans stopping funding at the Department of Defense for transgender surgeries.
Yeah, no, first off, you can't find any statistical indication that immigrants are taking jobs. Most localities they go to praise that they came or even ask for them, like in Springfield, where they turn the economy around. Data on the matter actually shows that writ large, they create more jobs than they take when they're allowed, talking legal immigrants, and when it's undocumented immigrants, they work undesirable jobs that are often left vacant by American workers, and actually that their entry specifically into the workforce provides upward mobility for U.S. workers and can actually positively affect their wages, especially for those on the bottom. Second is border crossings are now lower than they were when they spiked under Trump in 2020. We're also more energy independent now than any country ever in history has ever been, yet economy under Biden bad. But if Trump has low border crossings and energy independence, then economy good. Can anyone make this make sense to me that isn't just obviously giving the game away if we're going to say whatever Democrats do is bad? Also, as to the story he's speaking of the end, Republicans decided to now politicize the defense budget by adding in anti-trans legislation in hopes to force Democrats' hands to accept it. And they now want to sell that as it's Democrats' fault, right? Who their base will probably eat that up because they're looking at any chance to say Democrats bad and won't ever point the finger at their side.
RFK Jr. has had lots of vaccine skepticism, has falsely said that vaccines are linked to autism, but there's also other concerns as well. Some of the agricultural industry are concerned about his views on farming. You represent an ag state. When you look at this, does any of that bother you?
RFK is obviously a unique and diverse choice, a longtime, lifelong Democrat, one of the major figures in the Kennedy family. Obviously, he has a lot of views that Donald Trump appreciates and supports. But at the end of the day, Donald Trump is the president and the White House, and RFK is going to work for him. And whether it's putting American agriculture first or putting our kids first, this country is ready for a big debate about vaccines and a lot of these issues related to making America healthy again. I support RFK 110% to be the new secretary.
I just want to say to start, this belief that vaccines can cause autism is such a debunked and easily disprovable conspiracy that anyone who spreads this doesn't follow the science and should be disqualified from ever being able to have a leadership role or authority voice in medicine, right? It brings into question the mental state of the person. Like, that is how easily disprovable this is, especially with RFK Jr. even a step further, sharing a list of 100 studies that link vaccines to autism as his proof and his source. And he cites this in multiple interviews. But like, if you look at this list, it's a list of debunked studies where the author themselves have retracted the data and said it was wrong. They've said that hey, like, this study doesn't show what people are representing it shows. There's ones that came out where like, hey, like, this was funded to be like, to lie pretty much to you. Some that have nothing to do with vaccines and autism as well, but they're just thrown on the list to, like, you know, meeting it up. They don't think anyone's going to check all the studies. And like, this is what RFK Jr. considers a credible source. So it shows like, did you even check the source? And now we're supposed to consider him a credible source. Like, it's scary, especially when the Republican Party is saying things like this in this clip, where America is ready for a debate on vaccines. Excuse me, sir, we've settled that debate. We didn't have vaccines and mortality rates for diseases were through the roof. We started mandating vaccines and now the mortality rates are much lower. I think it's pretty settled. The benefit that society sees from herd immunity is pretty settled. The consensus is clear. And it's funny when we talk about that consensus because the right will be like, hey, life starts at conception and there's scientific consensus for this. So we have a right to oppress women because of that. But the same consensus exists for vaccines. And yet it's like, well, we can't trust doctors. We're going to trust scientists. Like, they're woke. Facts obviously have a liberal bias. Like, what are we doing here? Like, actually opening up these debates, like, there should be a platform for this. People don't realize that, like, these people who sell this conspiracy nonsense as a battle against big pharma are just funded by their own special interests. Like, they also are just funded by rich investors, right? Like, billionaires donate to RFK Jr. to spread this nonsense, but I'm sure he's just, you know, bravely going against the mold because he's not scared to speak his mind, and it's not the $1 million paychecks that's having him say that. It's, again, people who want to be against the establishment, but they don't even know what it is. Like, they just only through the perspective or lens that Trump sells it to them, right? They've been convinced to think that the establishment is just anything Democrats in government. So to them, big pharma is just the people who support vaccines and stuff and want like universal health care, right? Which is hilarious considering vaccines are one of the strongest parts or I guess products you could say that come out of the public sector. As are most medical advances, like if we're being honest, and if you knew what you were talking about, your outrage with big pharma would be the fact that rich investors take these medical advances that happen in the public sector and then decide to charge 300 times their worth in the name of profit, despite it was the fact that our tax money funded the research that created these medical advances. But again, capitalism, you know, capitalists can't ever go at capitalism. So it's just the Democrats that are doing this. But again, desperation drives demand. People don't really care as long as they're getting profit. But that doesn't even happen with these vaccines. So it's also funny to like say like, ooh, big pharma in the first place, because they're almost entirely handled through the public sector. I mean, it is a private public partnership, don't get me wrong. But like with COVID, you were able to get a vaccine without having to pay out of pocket, like you might have to with insulin, right? And then the COVID vaccine went through all the same trials that other vaccines do as well, where again, scientific consensus is settled on vaccines that make it through these trials. For some reason, that same consensus is enough to say life begins at conception because you can use that to, like, you know, control women, but it's not enough for vaccines because vaccines are Democrats. Like, let's just live in reality again, please. Is that too much to ask for?